Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of October. It's been quite the month. I have had some exciting things happening. I will hopefully have some news to share with you all very soon, but I can't just yet. So for now, we're going to talk about all the books that I've been reading in the last month. If you're new to my end of month wrap-ups, the way that these work is I will start by going over some of my reading stats for the month. As a stats nerd, I enjoy this. It's fun for me. If you are not interested, you are more than welcome to skip forward to where I start actually reviewing books. Then I will talk about books in three categories: my hits, my surprises, and my faves. Those of you who've been around for a while already know this, but my disclaimer is because I am now working with authors in the publishing industry, I am just talking about books that I like and feel like I can really recommend to other people. If I have a book for review or have any kind of a particular relationship with an author, I always disclose that so that you know kind of what you're getting. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into my reading stats for October. This month was pretty good, not as much reading as September, but October is always super busy. I've got New York Comic Con, we've got Halloween and like family stuff going on, so it's not too surprising. This month I read 21 books for a total of 7,120 pages, or an average page count of 230 pages per day, which is pretty good. 15 of the books that I read were advanced reader copies or books sent to me for review. This is pretty par for the course for me. I do read a lot of frontlist books for review. This month I had one reread. I did not read any graphic novels or manga. I did not read any indie books, and I did not read any books in translation. In terms of format, no big surprises here. I was heavily reading audio and then a little bit of other things. 16 of the books that I read this month were on audio. 4 of them were ebooks and 2 of them were physical books. Taking a closer look at those audiobooks, this month 7 of them are what I call shelf, which means I had a physical copy on my TBR and I got it off through audio, or mostly through audio. Some of these might have been a combination of reading physically and reading on audio. And in terms of where those audiobooks are coming from, this month 4 of them were from Audible, 2 of them were from Chirp, 1 of them was from Everand, 1 of them I don't have listed here, but I listened to it through Google Books, 5 of them were audio review copies from NetGalley, and 2 of them were from Libra FM, including I think one that was an audio influencer copy. I love Libra FM. I subscribe to them with my own money, but also every month they give me access to some audiobooks that I can download for free if I want to, in exchange for talking about them. I do think they're an excellent alternative to Audible if you are an audiobook listener. Their proceeds go to support indie bookstores, and you can choose your own local indie bookstore for your proceeds to go to, which I think is great, so I'm always a fan of them. In terms of age demographics, this month 16 of the books that I read were targeted at an adult audience. 4 of them were YA and 1 was middle grade. This is pretty typical for me, again, mostly adult, little bit of children's reading. Looking at publication date, in October, the earliest published book that I read was from 2006, and in total I read 4 books that are backlist, published prior to 2024. I also read 1 2024 release and 16 2025 releases. Again, given the fact that I am heavily prioritizing new books for review, this makes sense. In the almost 8 years since I started making videos on YouTube, I have always prioritized reading diversely. It's something that's really important to me. And so because of that, I have benchmarks that I try to hit, and I keep track of this every month. My goal is to read around 50% from Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors, and at least 25% from openly queer authors, and this month we did great. In October, 52.4% of the books that I read were by Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors, and 28.6% were by authors who are openly members of the LGBTQ+ community. So happy to see that. Taking a look at genre, this is interesting. Romance was a little down, horror was a little up, kind of makes sense for October, spooky season. 8 of the books that I read were fantasy. I also read 4 horror novels. I read 3 romances, including 1 contemporary romance and 2 speculative romances. A speculative romance is going to be your sci-fi, fantasy, or paranormal romance. I also read 2 sci-fi novels, 2 contemporary novels, and 1 novel in verse that I'm listing as poetry. Actually, I read 2 novels in verse, so it was kind of a toss-up. Do I put these in contemporary fiction? Do I put them in poetry? I guess I did 1 and 1, but whatever, it's fine. But lastly, if you want, we can look at how bad my TBR is. I knew this was going to happen because New York Comic Con happened this month, and I just haven't been reading at the rate that I used to. So even though I'm not really buying all that many books, my TBR just keeps going up and up and up, and this month is a lot. It's a lot. Okay, so Audio. My owned audio TBR as of the end of the month was 264 books, which is up 33 from the beginning of the year. Kindle has stayed pretty stable, 66, which is up 2 from the beginning of the year. Physical books, y'all, we got back over 500, 503 books. That's up 50 books from the beginning of the year. And I think a lot of this is the fact that I am just not reading as much as I did. Last year I read around 400 books, and years before that I had. This year, going back to work with all the things going on, I have been reading significantly less. I don't think I'm even gonna crack 300, which is still like a lot of books for a person to read, but compared to previous years, it is a lot less, but I'm getting more books than ever from publishers, so. So it is what it is. We'll figure something out. With that said, let's go ahead and get into my hits, surprises, and faves for the month of October. Let's start with my hits. This month, there were 9 of them. First, a book that I had for review from NetGalley. This is As Long as You're Mine by Nekesa Afia. This was interesting. It's historical fiction with a bit of a mystery plot engine. I would primarily call it historical fiction because I don't think people who are primarily mystery readers will find it to be as fast-paced or surprising as they might want it to. But for me, as someone who's not usually a big historical fiction reader, it was nice to have a little bit of the mystery element to keep the plot moving forward, and I liked it. This follows women in 2 different timelines. One of them was an actress in Hollywood who was passing as white, and then in the future, we have a young Black woman who is a dancer who starts to look into the history of this actress who died very suddenly and what actually happened with her death. The actress is in like early 1900s, and then the dancer is a couple of decades later. So both timelines are historical, and some of the big things this is looking at is the treatment of people of color in the entertainment industry more broadly, and especially what it looked like for people who were trying to pass as white during a time where being found out could be incredibly dangerous, and what impact did that have on their personal lives, what impact did that have on their careers, and what kinds of things did young women go through in Hollywood during that time, and how were they treated by men? Like, these are all things that are getting addressed. I thought it was well done. The characters were great. I liked the story. I liked the progression of it. I will say it doesn't feel as deeply historically grounded as other historical fiction books that I have read. Again, for me, that's fine. I'm not a big historical fiction reader, but I think if what you're looking for is a lot of immersive historical detail, that is less what you're going to get. I think this is more interested in the characters, in the themes, and the broad sort of treatment of women and of women of color in the entertainment industry and in Hollywood during these time periods. So I liked it. It was a hit. If that sounds up your alley, maybe go check it out. My next hit is The Everlasting by Alex C. Harrow, and I equally could put this in the surprises category, to be honest, because this book has a trope that I don't always like very much, but I feel like the way it was executed in this book worked for me. It's a fantasy novel about a lady knight and a academic man who ends up having to go back in time to make sure that she does what she needs to do to make the sacrifice that she makes for history to go the way that it's supposed to, right? But he ends up finding himself emotionally really entangled with this woman in a way that he didn't expect. Without spoiling things, this has a little bit of a sort of time loop element to it. Not exactly, but kind of. Again, I don't want to get into details because I don't want to get into spoilers. That is something that does not always work for me, but in this case, the way it was used and the way things were resolved, I found to be satisfying as a reader. And I thought this was a really emotional book. It takes a while to get going. It's a little bit slow to start, but I was so invested in these characters by the end of the book. And I think this has a lot of really interesting things to say thematically about the writing and rewriting of history, of who gets to tell the story of what happened and who is in power, who takes power and wants power, and how the history of a nation impacts that power and who can have it and who can't. And I think we are in a time where that feels very relevant. So I would definitely call this a hit. I think it's really good. If that sounds up your alley, check it out. I did have this for review from the publisher. My next hit is Never Whistle at Night, an Indigenous dark fiction anthology edited by Shane Hawk and Theodore C. Van Alst Jr. This was a birthday pick last month from one of my higher tier patrons. My highest tier patrons for their birthday month have the option of picking a book that they would like to see me read. So this was one of them, and it was already on my TBR, so that worked out really great. It's an anthology of short stories by Indigenous authors that are dark fiction. So some of them are horror, some of them are dark in other ways, or just have dark themes and content. I think honestly, when I first started it, I thought it was going to be all horror. I wasn't paying super close attention to the dark fiction of it all. And I was like not expecting some of the stories, which I was like, this isn't really horror, but it kind of makes sense. There are many. I don't know how many. I want to say like 26. Okay, there's like 26 short stories in here, which is a lot. I feel like with any anthology, there are going to be some that resonate with you more than others, but I for sure had some favorites that I really loved. Some favorites were White Hills by Rebecca Roanhorse, Quantum by Nick Medina, The Ones Who Killed Us by Brandon Hobson was good, Capgras by Tommy Orange, The Scientist Horror Story by Darcy Littlebadger. Oh, Collections by Amber Blazer Wardzala was great. I don't know if she's got other stuff that she's written. Anyway, so there's a bunch of Indigenous authors with different perspectives. It's got a wide range of kinds of stories, but I liked it. I would definitely recommend it. And I think it might be an interesting jumping off point to trying different authors. It does have some bigger author names in it and then people that I've never heard of. So I think it's a cool way of checking out different people's writing, seeing what you get on with, and there's some great stories in here. My next hit was also a patron birthday pick, and I'm really glad I read it because honestly, I don't know that I would have picked it up, and I quite enjoyed it. This is The Magician of Tiger Castle by Louis Sachar. So he is known for writing Holes, which I honestly have never read. I watched the movie when I was young and I liked it, but I know Holes is a renowned children's book. The Magician at Tiger Castle is something different. It is a fantasy novel for adults, and the tone and the vibe of it remind me a lot of classic fantasy stories that you got in like the 80s and 90s or even earlier. It's got the same vibe to me as things like The Last Unicorn or authors like that. It's got this sort of whimsical tone to it, but then deals with pretty dark things with a light touch. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It was interesting. It's being told by the magician in question. He's telling a story about his past. He's at Tiger Castle, which is this old castle that has been taken over by tigers. And he talks about back when he was a magician many, many years ago, because he seems to be immortal, many years ago when he was the court magician to this king. And there's this whole story of the princess who falls in love with a boy that she's not supposed to be with. She's betrothed to another royal. And so the boy she loves is arrested and put in the dungeon. And so the magician is sort of trying to help, but by making potions to make them forget each other is kind of how it starts. And so it's interesting because some darker things happen, but it's told in this whimsical tone. And I really liked it. I thought his writing was really good. Again, it gives me the vibes of an older fantasy novel, even though it is a pretty recent release. It came out earlier this year. If that sounds like fun, maybe go check it out. My next hit was The House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This was a reread, and this was the final book in the Mass Effect read-along, which was like a couple years long almost. We'd been doing it for so long, and I am very happy to say that we finally completed it. I did my whole reread of all of her books. We're now prepared for whenever it is that we get another book. There is a live show on my channel where we talk about House of Flame and Shadow, so I will link that up above if you want to check it out and kind of hear thoughts on it. But for me, this was a hit. I liked it the first time I read it. I liked it the second time I read it. I do think it is a very, very long book. There's a lot that happens in this book. I would say that it reminds me a lot of watching Return of the King, where there's like 3 points in the film that you're like, and this is the ending. Oh, no, wait. No, this is the ending. Nope, that's not it either. That's kind of how this feels like, where there are points where you're like, okay, this feels like it could be a natural end of a book. Oh, no, wait, but there's more. Like we're still going. There's more going on. And it's just like such an epic story and so much happens and there's so many characters and plot points and things happening. And I liked it. I get why this is too much for some readers. Fair, honestly, but I enjoyed it and I enjoyed my reread. So It was a hit. My next hit is Root Magic by Eden Royce. This was our Patreon book club pick for October, and we're going to be discussing it on Saturday. Because of Halloween, we kind of pushed back the date for our book club meeting. I'm excited to talk about it. I had heard really great things about this book, but I had never read from Eden Royce. And then I didn't realize until I had already started that I ended up reading 2 Eden Royce books this month, because I actually had an adult novella of hers for review that I was reading, which we'll talk about later on. So is serendipitous, I guess. This is middle grade horror. It's set in the American South in the 1960s, and it follows 2 Black Gullah children who are learning root magic from family members and are dealing with lots of spooky things. There's some paranormal spooky things, and then there's some real world scary things like police officers who are harassing their family, for instance. I think that this book really threads the needle of being able to deal with intense, difficult subject matter in a way that feels honest and with the appropriate amount of seriousness, but while being age appropriate for a middle grade audience, where it's heavy, but it doesn't go too dark, right? So like there's some bad stuff that happens, but things are mostly okay at the end of the story, right? We're dealing with racism in the middle of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. We're also dealing with like the spooky, scary haints of it all, and getting into the history and tradition of root magic, and dealing with bullying, and dealing with a wide range of things in a way that I think really works for kids. I thought this was fantastic. It's spooky without being super scary. It does a really great job navigating difficult subject matter in an age-appropriate way. Definitely would recommend, for sure, a hit. My next hit was The Griffin Sisters' Greatest Hits by Jennifer Weiner. You know, I don't read a ton of women's fiction. I am heavily a genre fiction reader, but I found the story to be really compelling. It's a story about music and messy sister relationships, very messy sister relationships, if I'm being honest. I had to like remind myself reading this sometimes, like, okay, they're like 20 years old during most of this book, right? Do you think that is a key thing to remember when reading this book, is they're like 20 when a lot of this is happening? But it follows 2 sisters who were part of a girl group who had a really popular album, and it was really messy behind the scenes. We have one sister who was incredibly talented, but plain and plus size in the 90s when that was a rough place to be. And then the pretty thin sister who wanted to be the star of the show, but was not very talented. And their relationship with each other and with music. And also, I should say that the very talented sister reads as neurodivergent, probably is on the autism spectrum, but maybe wouldn't have been identified during the time that she was growing up. There are definitely difficult things to read in here. It is a book that deals pretty heavily with fat phobia as it existed in the 1990s and as it exists in the entertainment industry particularly. And so because they are musicians, there is a lot of that, and it is super messy, but I definitely liked it. I thought it was well done. I thought it was an emotionally compelling story, and it was one that worked for me. So yeah. 2 more hits to go, and then we're going to get into my surprises. First is Joy to the Girls by Rachel Lippincott and Allison Derrick. This is a YA sapphic holiday romance novella, and it is a companion to She Gets the Girl, which is a YA sapphic romance. So this follows the couple from that book a few years later as they're finishing college over the holidays, trying to matchmake a couple of friends and get them together, but also they're keeping secrets from each other that are pretty serious, and they need to have a honest conversation. I really like this. I thought it was really cute, really festive, and also it is one of a bunch of novellas that I read for a reading challenge. So I'm going to link this vlog up above if you want to go check it out, where I was like, let me see if I can get a bunch of short books off my TBR, things I had for review. So I read a bunch of novellas, and I'm, for the rest of them, probably not going to get too deep into what they're about. If you want to hear more thoughts, you can go check out that vlog, but this was definitely a hit. I thought it was great. Would recommend. My final hit was another novella that I read for that video. This is Fate's Bane by C.L. Clark. The author has said this is about sad swamp lesbians, and I think that is accurate. It is a sapphic fantasy novella about star-crossed lovers from enemy factions. It's got magic elements to it. It is tragic. It's beautifully written. I definitely would recommend it. It's also interesting to see C.L. Clark write something different, something in short form. I thought this was beautifully executed. Definitely would recommend. I did have this one for review, and I had Joy to the Girls for review from the publisher as well. Those 2 are both for review. Next, let's move on to my surprises. This month, there were 8 of them. First up, I did not have a physical copy, but I just got one in the mail, so thank you to Saga Press. Great timing. This is All That We See or Seem by Ken Liu. I literally opened it this morning and I was like, oh, perfect. I am about to film a video about this book, so great. I love Ken Liu's writing. I think his writing is incredible. This book is a genre that is not my go-to, but I was like, yes, I want to read it because it's Ken Liu. It's like a cyberpunk thriller, I would say. It's set in a kind of dystopian future, and it follows a young woman who's very talented at hacking and using things like advanced AI of the time to hack into things and find out information. But because of her own complicated history, she tries to stay off the grid as much as possible. She ends up getting drawn into a mystery. It's a missing persons case. A man comes to her saying that his very famous wife has gone missing and has apparently been kidnapped, and he needs help finding her. And so she gets involved in the messiness of what's going on there. I thought this was really interesting, really well executed. There's a lot of technological world building built into this, which I think makes sense because having read from Ken Liu before, I think he's really interested in the ways that technology impact society and impact people and the choices that we make. And I think you for sure see this threaded here. It is supposed to be the first of a series, so the main character probably goes on to solve more cases, and I would read more. I liked it. It had some interesting twists and turns, some of which I saw coming, some of which I definitely did not. And yeah, I was a fan. It was a hit for me. Also a little bit of a surprise, I think, because this is not a subgenre I usually reach for or review, but if it's Ken Liu, I'm like, hey, yeah, give it to me. And it was good. So thank you to Saga Press for sending me a copy. My next surprise is A Land So Wide by Erin A. Craig. This was so interesting. It went in a direction I did not expect it to go. It is her adult debut. I've read a bunch of her YA stuff and really love them. I think she does a great job of writing atmospheric stories and strong female characters. And so I was like, yeah, that's what this sounds like. Cool, give it to me. I feel like I was real invested in the first third of this book. The setup for it is so good. We have a young woman who lives in this mysterious town that is surrounded by monsters, and they're protected from these monsters by these giant magical stones that they can't go outside of at night. And also, creepy thing is that to get married, young women have to participate in the hunt. It's a ritual where they will run and hide, and the first young man to find them and claim them will be their husband. Now, normally, they'll give a little heads up of where they're hiding to their beau, but sometimes things could go really wrong. And so our main character has a boy that she's in love with, and her dad wants her to be with somebody else, and the hunt is happening, and then things go kind of off the rails. This went in a direction that I was like, wait, what is happening here? I still have questions, I feel like, about the world and like what exactly was going on, but it is really interesting. I wish I could talk more about the ending, but I really can't spoil things. I just was like, oh, there's a point at which some things shift, and this just became a book that was not what I was expecting it to be. Not in a bad way, just like oh, that is not where I thought this book was going to go, or like what I thought the vibe was going to be. It was interesting. It was interesting. It was a surprise. So if you have read this, let me know your thoughts. Curious to see people's reactions to it. I do think it is very atmospheric. There's a lot that's done really well in here. I have questions. My next surprise is another one that Saga Press sent me for review. This is How to Defeat a Demon King in 10 Easy Steps by Andrew Rowe. I have never read Lit RPG before, and this is Lit RPG. I didn't really know what to expect, but I was like, let's give it a go. It's not very long. It sounds fun. And I actually quite enjoyed it. So I guess the intent of Lit RPG is basically, it's like a novel told as if you or like the characters are in a role-playing game, right? So there'll be things that are a little absurdist, like, okay, we're gonna grind and do an action repeatedly that is kind of silly in order to gain strength in an area that's not directly related. Things like that. It's like funny, kind of tongue-in-cheek, at least the way this is done. and has the mechanics of a role-playing game, but it's a novel. It's really interesting, but as somebody who has played role-playing games, I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I would say this is definitely comedic. It's very tongue-in-cheek, and it follows a young woman who is going to try to be the chosen one, but is not doing things the way that she's supposed to do them, and the way things go is not what you might expect. I thought it was a lot of fun. I would try more in this genre. My next surprise was The Works of Vermin by Hiron Ennis. So I read Hiron Ennis's debut novel and loved it so much. Really unique, really unlike anything else. And so I was like, okay, cool. Let's also read this one, even though it sounds very different. And I would say it is very different. Also very unique. I think I will definitely continue to pick stuff up from this author, because even though this book didn't necessarily resonate with me in the same way that the first one did, it was still just so different and inventive in a really interesting way, and it went some real interesting places. It is weird, it is horror, so heads up about that. There's lots of gruesome stuff, body horror, various things, and also horror of the system that the people are involved in. At its heart, this is a story about a brother and sister. So we have a brother who is trying to do everything he can to protect his sister, and we've got a couple of different timelines that we're working with, and everybody lives in the stump of this tree with like giant insects. It's like, I don't know, my best guess is that maybe it's like a dystopian future where radiation or something like that changed humanity and also made bugs to be like huge, like big, huge monsters. And so we have the upper class people who live these sort of lavish lives up in the branches of the tree, and then down in the roots, we've got the working class people who are exterminating the bugs or milking them for venom that's used in like perfumes that are like biological weapons. So it's really, really interesting, really unique. It is the kind of book that I could see liking more on a reread than I did the first time. I think I didn't know what to expect going in, and it was just a little disorienting because I was like, wait, what is happening? So I think this is one, if you appreciate horror that is really experimental and doing interesting things, this is going to be a hit for you. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, but it was a surprise. And I think if that sounds like your thing, check it out for sure. My next surprise is The House Sapphire by Marissa Meyer. This is her latest YA novel, and it is loosely a retelling of the myth of Bluebeard. I love Bluebeard. I love Bluebeard mythology, and this takes it in a very different direction with a different vibe than I was necessarily expecting, but I still like it, and I think this could maybe be a great jumping off point for teenagers or other people picking it up to get more into Bluebeard mythology and read some other retellings that are fabulous. So this takes place after the death of Bluebeard, like a generation later, and it follows a young woman who is illegally giving tours of a mansion associated with Bluebeard. And she can see and hear ghosts, but she's also kind of a con artist. And she ends up getting called on by the heir of Bluebeard's estate to help her get rid of his grandfather's ghost who is haunting the lands. And then there's also the ghosts of the wives, the dead wives, and it kind of goes in some interesting ways. It also works in a lot of French monster mythology. I think it's French monster mythology, but there's a lot of different fantastical creatures and monsters that are in the story. And then to some extent, there's your typical sort of like YA will they, won't they romance story. So it's interesting. It's a different take on Bluebeard than I've ever read, which is why I would say it's a surprise, but it's still fun. And again, I think it could be a great introduction to some incredible stories that have been told around this issue. It's just like a different tone, a little lighter tone and more modern. Final three surprises are all books that I read as part of that novella reading vlog. So again, you can go check that out if you want to get more information on these. First up, we have King of the Neuroverse by Idris Goodwin. This is a YA novel in verse, and it's a surprise because it wasn't what I was expecting. For some reason, I had it in my head that it was speculative, and it is not at all speculative, but it's still really good. It's set in the 1990s, and it follows a Black teen boy with ADHD in summer school who is really struggling, and he is in the process of getting a diagnosis. He's kind of fighting with an English teacher who doesn't understand the way that he thinks, and he really expresses himself through rhymes and through verse. And this novel is him sort of telling his own story. I think it's great. It's really powerful. It's got important themes. Again, not going to get too deep into this because you can check out that other video if you want to hear more, but I definitely liked it. I think it's really good. It's an accessible book because it is written in verse. It's a quick read. Would recommend. Next is The First Thousand Trees by Premi Mohammed. This is the final novella in a sci-fi dystopian series by this author, and I have really loved all of them. This one was a surprise because it follows a different character. The first two novellas follow a young woman who's sort of coming of age in this dystopia where there's like this fungus that grows inside of people and can eventually kill them. And this one follows her best friend from book one, who goes off on his own and joins a community where life there is a lot harder than he expects. So in some ways it's a survival story, but I would say taking collectively, each different novella is a look at different ways that humanity might try to cope with this sort of dystopian future, this sort of falling apart of society, and different ways that they might try to survive and make things work, and the pros and cons, the positives and the pitfalls of each of those different ways. So really interesting. I do recommend the whole series. I think they're fantastic. Her writing is really great. Just wasn't quite what I was expecting because of the perspective change. And my final surprise for the month was The Leaving Room by Amber McBride. This is another YA novel in verse that's really interesting. It's supposed to be set in the moments between life and death. The idea that you have like 4 minutes after you stop breathing before you're dead, and imagines what those moments are like for children or teenagers. It follows a young woman who is in charge of this leaving room where children in between life and death will come to visit her in order to be ready to sort of pass on, and they leave some of their memories with her. And so the story is divided up into the different stages of grief. And so each piece of it, each child she encounters is about unpacking those different stages of grief. And it's also about the choices we have between life and death. It is also sapphic, so has that element. It wasn't what I was expecting. I've read from Amber McBride before, and I think her writing is gorgeous. But it was really interesting, really thought-provoking. So surprise, I liked it. Lastly, let's talk about my faves. This month there were 3 of them. One of the 3 is a 6-star read, which is what I call a favorite of the year, and the other 2 were 5-star reads that I consider favorites of the month. So there were other books that I gave 5 stars to on my spreadsheet. I just like to pull the ones that really resonated with me. So let's get into it. The first one is Psychopomp and Circumstance by Eden Royce. This is that other Eden Royce book that I said I was reading. I loved this. Honestly, I need to try to get my hands on a physical copy of it. I would like to have a copy on my shelves. I thought this was fantastic. I had a copy for review. This is another one that I read for that novella vlog. It is a speculative novella that I think is really brilliant, and the writing is incredible. It's spooky from a ghost story type perspective without being truly scary. So I would recommend this for people who want to try horror or wanting to dip their toes in but don't want anything too scary, or people who like spooky stuff but not too scary. I think this is a great option. It's set in a sort of fantasy version of Reconstruction era American South, and it follows a Black young woman whose aunt and mother have been estranged for many years, and then she finds out that her aunt has died. And she, against her mother's wishes, volunteers to be the person to organize her aunt's pomp, her funeral service, and all of the different things that go around that. So she goes to her aunt's house that's kind of a little spooky, haunted, maybe haunted by her aunt's ghost, and she has to do all of these things to prepare. And a lot of this is about grief, it's about regret, it's about secrets from the past and messy families and how those things impact us. It's a short novella, it's not very long, but the amount she's able to accomplish in this is really incredible. I thought it was really good. It's one that stuck with me, and I would for sure recommend it. So this was definitely one of my favorite books that I read this month. My other favorite of the month was The Entanglement of Rival Wizards by Sarah Rosh. I loved this so much and did not expect it to make me cry. Like, why was I crying in this as people are like dealing with their trauma? I thought this was so well done. We have rival academic wizards who are forced to work together and fall for each other, and each have trauma from their childhoods and their past that they have to unpack and work through. And I just thought this was, yes, fun and lighthearted at times, but also so surprisingly emotionally resonant. And there was a scene that had me crying. I was like, oh wow, okay, this is really good. I like Sarah Rosh generally. This is definitely one of my favorites that I've read from her. I thought this was great. Would recommend. It is a spicy gay fantasy romance, but again, there's like so much more going on here. It was great. Lastly, my 1-star favorite of the year read for the month. I loved this so much. This is Red City by Marie Lu. I am a big fan of Marie Lu's writing. This is her adult debut, and it is so good. So good. People have been comparing it to Jade City by Fonda Lee, and I definitely see the comparison, but with Marie Lu's writing style, it's a gritty urban fantasy that's sort of like the mafia meets alchemy with a hint of Romeo and Juliet. So we have rival alchemical houses who are sort of like mafia type level of violence, and we have star-crossed lovers, childhood best friends turned star-crossed lovers from rival houses. Their romance is impossible, and yet they love each other. But also, do they choose power and money, or do they choose love? And yeah, this is rough. It's definitely much darker, grittier, and sexier than any of her YA stuff, but it also reads like Marie Lu. I loved it. I thought this was so good. I'm definitely excited to read more in the series, so would recommend. So there you go. Those are the books that I read in the month of October. Overall, I would say it's a really good reading month. I enjoyed almost everything that I read, and yeah, a lot of things to recommend. If you reached this point in the video, leave me a spooky emoji down below since we just finished Halloween. And for your question of the day, tell me about a book that recently surprised you, where it wasn't what you were expecting, but you ended up really loving it anyway. Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.